Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Sheely. Welcome to CPG Therapy. I am your host, your self proclaimed queen of culture, only because I've been in the dairy industry for 7 years out of the 20 that I've been just loving CPG. But today we're going to be talking about how brands are a lot like troubled teens. I spent a transformative year in the Utah desert walking with teens in the wilderness, and the lessons that I learned and taught, I'm going to be sharing with you. I worked in what I taught was a transition camp. And these kids came to me at the end of their 6 weeks, 8 weeks that they were in wilderness, and they would spend their last week with me, and I would teach them all the principles from the book Leadership and Self-Deception, Anatomy of Peace, and I would help them, give them a mindset shift and help them think about a different way of being. Taught them that they had free agency for their choices, and that when they pick their choices, that they also chose the consequences as well. But it was a transformational year. This whole podcast is kind of going to be like one big transition camp. you know, I'm going to help you create a better culture. And I'm hoping that with these tools, you're going to be able to deepen the relationships you have at home and at work and with your family and with your personal relationships. I know they completely transformed my relationships with certain people in my family. I've seen how at work, it was just we were able to have breakthroughs by the collaboration that I had because of the mindset shifts. It's been I can't say enough about it. It's just been transformative, and I'm so excited to share it with you. But I want to talk about how do we bridge that cultural divide and change our mindset so that we can show up at work with many personalities and be our best selves in the workplace at home. So buckle up. This is going to be quite a ride. Before I get into the next phase, I just need to give a shout out to some people who have really encouraged me to do this podcast. Robert Johnson from New Seasons, Felice Thorpe from Chef's Warehouse and Felice Foods, and Peter Jaruski, my former analyst from Spins. The first time I talked to him, he said, "Michelle, has anybody ever told you had podcast energy?" And I said to him, "Yes, I do, don't I? I'm going to start a podcast. You know what my idea is?" And he's just said to me, "This is exactly what CPG needs, and you need to do this." Robert Johnson said the same thing, and he's been kind of my accountability partner in this, helping me keep going to make sure this podcast came to fruition. So let's go. Let's get started. So my first thought is CPG is a really unique industry where many people from many different backgrounds and cultures just all meld together in pursuit of winning the shelf. We need to get our brand on shelf and our brand out there so that we can win. But with all these different backgrounds and all these different cultures, how do we come together to bridge the cultural divide to be in relation to each other to win on shelf? Because you're going to face immense challenges in CPG, but that your team and your cultural dynamics don't have to be the obstacle. They don't have to be the obstacle from what's helping you move forward and grow your brand and have better relationships. Your culture can be the fuel, and your team can be the vehicle that drives you on the road to success. Because, now listen here, because success is not dependent on the right behavior. The right behavior that drives success can only be fueled by the right mindset. Let me say that again. Success isn't dependent on the right behavior. The right behavior that drives success can only be fueled by the right mindset. Just for example, when I was in wilderness, a lot of these wilderness programs, they're not all good. I'm going to make sure to say that. And they're not all good. And a lot of them do behavior modification. Well, all that you get with behavior modification is resistance. When they came to our program, we tried to change their mindset. We knew that by changing their mindset and giving them a different way to think, that they would have a different way of being, and that mindset was really what drove the behavior. We let them choose the behavior. They had free agency to choose the behavior, and when they chose the behavior, they chose the consequences. And it's the same at work. Choose Mindset will help drive the behavior that'll help you win. So let's talk about people. Now, CPG, it attracts a different breed. I'm a different breed. The people that I meet are a different breed. The people in CPG are what people like to call extra. Oh, yeah, wheeze extra. And wheeze extra because that's what it takes to win in CPG. We are hustlers, slayers, players, professional and not so professional athletes. We're Ivy League graduates, we're college dropouts, we're A students, C students, former addicts, celebrities, sharks in the Shark Tank, deadhead fish heads, grandmas, godfathers, you name it, we're in it. And we're all in this beautiful world of CPG together. Because CPG people are some of the most passionate people with some of the most unbridled energy, and they thrive on winning because that's what it takes to build a brand in CPG. People that are passionate and people that thrive on winning. But being extra, the flip side of that also comes with a lot of personality, and we all have quote unquote issues. And nobody is exempt. Like when you hire somebody, you're hiring their issues. You hiring it with everything that they're bringing. And you kind of know that there's like a spectrum of issues and behavior that is going to be acceptable for what these people are bringing to the table and what they're bringing to the personality potluck. I love thinking about the personality potluck because at a potluck, most of the food's digestible, some of it's not. And it's the same with personalities. Most of them are digestible. Most of them you can work with them. And some of them you just can't. So in an interview, like when you bring your resume, a lot of times, you kind of hide your issues. But really in the interview, we should just say, bring all your issues. Let's unpack the baggage together. I want to know exactly what I'm getting into because eventually we're going to find out anyway. I mean, we're all people who are just showing up to work, like dressed as our 5-year-old selves. We all have that little human that was so impressionable when we were young. We're bringing that to work and we're bringing all those insecurities and all those curiosities and all the you couldn't and you can't and you're amazing and you can do this and you can do that and you can't do this and you can't do that. We're bringing all of those confidences that we have about ourselves and all of those insecurities, and we're dressed as adults, but deep inside, that little person is still shining through. And we try to, like, there's this committee that goes on in our heads. Like, okay, like if you're starting a new job and you've got PTSD because you got laid off from your last job, or you got a big promotion and, you've got imposter syndrome, or you don't know if you can do the job, like you hope you have enough, and you've got this committee of little angels and devils going off in your head, just talking on one shoulder versus another, and you've got to silence them. And mindset will help you silence that committee, will help you turn it down. I mean, I know I'm not the only one that's got the committee in the head. So we show up with issues like, self-doubt, like I said, imposter syndrome, workplace PSD, and we question whether we know enough. Like, are we going to fail? Aren't we going to fail? I will tell you, failure is the pathway to success. I don't want to, when I hire somebody or I work with people, I don't want to work with people who haven't failed. Failure is the best lessons for learning and transformation. So also, how do you deal with the assholes? I'm going to be very candid. I swear sometimes. I hope that doesn't offend you. I apologize in advance, but there's sometimes going to be some swear words. I mean, I am me. I'm very authentic and I show up as myself. So, how do we deal with the assholes? How do we navigate through the workplace, you know, y- how do we navigate the most difficult personalities and work with them to achieve the goals and help you win? There's some big personalities in CPG, and you guys, who the jerks are. Their reputation precedes them. We've all met them. We've all dealt with them. We've had to negotiate with them at the table. But how do we work with them and how do we partner with them to achieve our goals? Those are the people and those big personalities that we have to work with. The bigger question is, though, how can we become so self-aware of our own personal judgments from our own historical perspectives that drive our behavior, and how are we behaving in relation to each other so that we can achieve the highest results? How can we be so authentic with ourselves and the world around us that we change our mindset and we can change that narrative that we're telling ourselves? You know, that committee in our head writes the narrative that we tell ourselves. How do we change that mindset so that we can rewrite the narrative so that we can win? So, how do we come together with all of our personalities and our grocery bags of issues and work together so that we can thrive together? In this episode, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to take you through my background, like a prologue in a book, a forward, so you can understand really what the foundation is for this podcast and where I'm coming from. I'm going to introduce you to the books that I've studied and was trained on in what I taught at-risk youth during that transformative year that has carried me my entire career. I'm also going to talk about my transformative experience in wilderness rehab that just completely changed my mindset forever. Like I said, I taught that transition camp, and this program is going to be just one big transition camp. There's going to be some times where we have mindset book clubs, and, we can, all get on this together for those of you who want to. But we're going to talk about all of that. And then, I want to talk about my time with troubled teens because building a brand is much like working with troubled teens. Know what the lessons in leadership have taught me and how they have changed my life. And they're just for the foundation of how I show up every day. And together, we're going to start to change the narrative so we can win on shelf. Okay, so a little about me. So 20 years ago, I started in the beauty industry. I was right out of college. I was bartending, got a job for one of the largest beauty supply distributors in the country. I was the biggest hustler, hustling anything to make a salon run. We're talking shampoo, conditioner, hair color, bleach, foil, capes, drapes. You've been to a salon, everybody has to get their hair cut or colored. And in that first week that I started, I remember my boss telling me, he was out there training me, and we walked into a salon and he said, "Do you see that plant 3 feet in on the right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You can turn that plant into about $10,000 per year. And we need to show them how to do that." And what he was telling me was that plant that was collecting dust in prime real estate in the salon, if you put product there, that could be an extra 10,000 plus dollars a year for a salon. For a salon owner, that's big money. That could be the difference between if they're in the red or in the black. So that's where I learned how to turn square feet into dollars. And so when I got hired in, natural food, and it was basically the same thing, I was selling shelf space where basically square inches were turning into feet on shelf. And that had to turn a certain dollars per week. But, being 100% on commission, I had to make money. I mean, I lived in San Francisco. I had an apartment I had to pay for. And there was this one underdeveloped area in San Francisco, and it was the Mission District. And nobody was going there to, sell them their product. And the reason why is because there was a language barrier where everybody speaks Spanish. That's the district. And I thought to myself, my Spanish is pretty good. I mean, it's not the best. I'm not fluent, but I did live in Mexico. I am Mexican, and I did study abroad in Guadalajara. So maybe I can do this. Maybe it's not perfect, but maybe I can go into those salons and they'll talk to me, and I'll just try. Before I had this I can't mindset, but I needed to eat and I needed to pay rent. So for me, I was like, I'm going to fake it till I make it. And I'm just going to go into those salons and I'm going to try. And I'm going to tell you what happened. For 2 years, every Wednesday, I hustled those streets of San Francisco in the Mission District, going from 16th Street to 26th Street, up and down those streets, talking to every salon owner in Spanish. And the result of that was I ended up adding like another $200,000 a year, to the business. I ended up making tons of friends in this area. My Spanish improved, but I was the main Spanish education rep in San Francisco. You know, manufacturers hired Spanish speaking educators to be able to service this area because it had grown so much and they saw so much potential. I was my Spanish, I mean, I was practically fluent when I was using it. I put on a Spanish only hair show. That hair show sold out. And it all came from changing my mindset. I went from I can't to, you know what, I'm just going to show up and I'm just going to do it because I need to eat. I need to pay bills. And it worked. But as much as I loved that job, something was missing. I knew that I needed some sort of leadership skills. I needed to do something. And I knew that I didn't always want to be a rep in the beauty industry. I wanted to be a therapist. That was always my dream, to go back to school and become a marriage and family therapist. So I found a job as working on a therapeutic team, in wilderness therapy. And I decided I was going to take a sabbatical from my beauty job. And I left my rent controlled apartment in San Francisco and my very well paying job to move to Utah and make minimum wage and hike through the desert with teenagers. I remember my mother telling me, "Are you sure? Are you really sure you want to do this?" And I just said, "Mom, it's just something I have to, like, something is calling me to do this, and I just don't know what it is, but I have to do this." I mean, I went from the high fashion world of the beauty industry to the Utah desert where I was in hiking boots and army fatigues. It's like, how did Elle Woods in the beauty industry go to the Utah desert? I mean, it was just crazy. Like, why would I do that? Well, like I said, something was calling me. It was because I wanted to be a therapist and I wanted to achieve my goals, but there was just something more. And in this time when I got there, this is where I started my training with mindset and where I was introduced to the works of C. Terry Warner, who is the founder of the Arbinger Institute. He's a philosopher and a consultant, and I was trained on all his methodologies. There was leadership and self-deception. That was the book I was trained on, all the learnings in there. And that's the kind of the foundation for how I show up in the world and what I'm going to be teaching you in our transition camp. I know there was Anatomy of Peace, that book, and then Bonds That Set Us Free. And those methodologies that I was trained on helps me bring more humanity in the workplace. And it also trains companies on how to build high performing teams and leaders. Like I said, I taught leadership and self deception, which helps people see others as people and not as obstacles. A lot of times we see people as obstacles who are getting in our way of doing something. But we realize when we get out of the box and we take accountability for what we're bringing to the table and how we're contributing to the situation is when things can change. The Arbinger Institute, they're known throughout the world, and they have this client list of companies like Nike, Microsoft, IBM, Boeing, and Google, and many more. And I've seen these principles at work, and I've seen them in my personal life, and I will be telling you stories how these have worked. And I've seen them completely transform relationships and teams. I mean, I had I lived when I was a wilderness instructor, we lived with like 5 or 6 people in a house, and we never had issues because we had a framework for communicating so that we could talk about difficult things or difficult situations and be able to have solutions that were positive. So, so what did I learn in wilderness? What I learned is when you strip away the TV, the computer, your cell phone, you don't have any money. Money is not a commodity that is useful in the wilderness. When you strip away all those things, the only thing that you have to survive is your character. I spent countless nights in sub-zero temperatures with these teenagers nestled in a shelter made from a tarp and cordage. That was it. There were no cabins. There were no cabins at all. My shelter was made from a tarp that you would get at Walmart and some cordage with tied with knots as if I were a Boy Scout. I've never been a Boy Scout in my life. I was a brownie for 1 year and I left because my teacher was mean. So I had a tarp and cordage. That was it. And we had to work the program. So if we could not ask these kids to do anything that we weren't willing to do. So we had to work the program. So essentially, I went to rehab. I never went to rehab before. Maybe I should have at some point in my life, but I was in rehab now. And every step I took in the Utah desert on what's called walkabout, and that's what we would call it. We would say that we were on walkabout because in walkabout, like when the Aborigines go on walkabout in Australia, it's almost like a rite of passage. They go from being, boys to men and, girls to young women. It's you learn and you grow. And every step I took, I had to let go of, baggage that just was no longer serving me. Like we used to do this lesson with packing our packs. Like our backpacks were made of leather and a tarp and willow branches. And we had little saws and we would saw off these willow branches and we would make these backpacks. And yeah, nothing was from REI. Like REI didn't exist out there. As a matter of fact, well, the stuff from REI is good, but when you're in those kind of elements, you need something really durable, extremely durable for those elements if you're out there like over 100 days in the wilderness. Anyway, so all of these lessons, had merit where you had to, make sure everything was tied correctly with your pack, make sure that at the bottom of the pack, you made what was a dream catcher to kind of carry all of your things. And then you would bend the willow in the fire to kind of make the frame of your backpack and put it on. And you had all these leather branches and people would take pride in these backpacks. Honestly, my wilderness backpack was more comfortable than my North Face backpack just because I had custom made it for my body. And it was just, and I was constantly reworked it because in the program kind of reworking your backpack and constantly bending to it is a lesson for life, like because in life you have to constantly mend and rework and have time management and make sure you have enough money in the bank and make sure that your life everything is in order. And that is what the backpack is. That backpack is the life that you carry and how you live in the wilderness. It is symbolizes the life that you have at home and having all of your quote unquote stuff together so that you're not a hot mess. Anyway, this is where I taught transition camp and I taught all of these lessons, from leadership and self-deception. And I tried to influence these kids, to get out of their box and really kind of influence their way of thinking so that they could really let go of the choices that held them back or see that, you have path A or path B and you get to choose, but you also choose those consequences. And we would have group therapy and individual therapy. And in therapy, I always was awarded the Truth Speaker Award. And the Truth Speaker Award is you can get it from students, you can get it from staff. That Truth Speaker Award is somebody who is willing to tell the truth with dignity and respect and be responsive in a way that somebody can really digest and listen to. And it's still to this day, my current boss, Steve, one of the first things he noticed about me, he said, "Michelle, you get really quiet when you don't like something." And I said, "It's not that I don't like something. I'm trying to tell you in the most diplomatic way that I disagree with you." And so I'm still doing it all these years later. But I was awarded that. And this is where, it comes into this podcast where I will always tell you the truth. I will always try to be very diplomatic, but I think truth has dignity to it and everybody deserves the truth. So I learned more from those kids than they could have ever taught me walking with them in that desert. It was the most pivotal and transformational experience of my life. And walking with those kids and sharing our life stories and experience on that trail in the desert, but in every condition imaginable, completely changed me for the better. We were all surviving together and we had to thrive together because we only had our character to get us through. After a year, I had to leave wilderness. You guys, I was just so cold. I just couldn't do another year. There was this one time where we got a freak storm it was in October, and there was not any plans in the weather in the weather forecast that said we were going to get snow. And all of a sudden, snow came in out of nowhere and just buried us. And I remember my feet were frozen because we didn't have our waterproof boots. We didn't have anything that we were ready for the snow. We had to have headquarters bring us out, everything different, you know, all the warmer gear and everything for the kids and for us so that we could be warm and survive out there. But my feet were completely numb. And I remember Jay, who, my other staff, he took off my boots. He took off everybody's boots, and he was from Wyoming. He was used to these like really, really cold temperatures, and he got a fire started. That day that we got that freak storm, he put my feet by the fire and they were so numb. And when they started coming back to life, I started to get feeling in my feet again. The pain was excruciating. It is some of the worst pain I have ever felt. I mean, I had open heart surgery, I had broken ribs, and that didn't even hurt as much as my feet coming back to life from basically being frozen. But then the following week, he told me, he said, I was really surprised to see you come back. I did not think you were going to make it. Anyway, so I left and I went back to leading a team of salespeople in the beauty industry. And, I realized that leading adults is not like leading teenagers. Adults have some pretty bad habits, and their habits are just more ingrained, and their mindset is just like kind of cured into their being. And it is much harder. They are much harder to change because they can't change unless they want to. Where teens are much more malleable and responsive if you show them respect and, you can get to them before their bad habits set in. And I learned that I could influence teenagers, but adults' mindsets were just much harder to change. But the only person that I could change was myself. I had to show up as myself. I had to change, and I had to change in response to others. And by doing what I had the sense to do, because if I have the sense to do something, that feeling that you have, that's kind of like the universe talking to you, then that is the right thing to do. And so that's how I, showed up in the world. I focused on me changing and how I was in response to others. So after wilderness, I was on my way to grad school. I applied, to be an MFT, and then disaster struck. My husband asked for a divorce. I was alone in Utah with no family, and I knew I needed to move home to California. So packed all my belongings, my dog, my baby, and I moved back to California. My dad came and rescued me, got the U-Haul, and we moved home. I moved back home. I wasn't famous. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't rich. I felt like I was a total failure. I did not achieve my goals. And I came back with the tail in between my legs, and I moved in with my mom and dad. And it was a very humbling experience. I had no money. My daughter and I were sharing a room, and I had to get a job. And pretty soon I got a job in CPG as a sales rep. And the rest is history. I had to build a life for myself. I had to completely rebuild my life from scratch. And I did it. And I did it with CPG, and I loved it. And in 20 years being in CPG, between the beauty industry and the natural food industry, here's what I've learned. I've learned that your partnerships are everything. We're like CPG orangutans. We're going from one brand to another, one retailer to another. We don't leave. We just swing from one branch to another. We don't we're constantly moving. And your character just defines you. It's how you show up. I've said this before, how you show up in relation to others, just as who we are, and your partnerships are gold. We are all people Be empathetic, treat people well, and treat people like they're people because they are. So just remember that partnerships are everything and your reputation will precede you. I know nobody wants to hear this, but the second theme I'm going to say, I mean, me being a truth speaker, is nobody cares that your brand is the best. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody gives a shit how good it tastes. Can it sell? Is your brand getting the dollars per store per week and the, units per store per week in order to win on shelf? Be open to feedback. You're going to hire partners and you're going to pay very good money for those consultants. Listen to them. It is extremely important for you to build your brand. You know, have trust in people and listen. Be coachable, be malleable, because character is what's going to help you win on shelf. And you being open to being coachable is going to help you make the changes necessary so that your brand can win. And, you can do everything right and you can still lose. So celebrate every win, no matter how big or small. This is so important because wins are few and far between. The losses are inevitable, and the losses can be huge mental and emotional setbacks for people and brands. Winning, I don't care how big or small. Like if you get another point of distribution, in a store, ring a bell, do something to help you celebrate. And when you get the big wins, like you get another region of Whole Foods, or you get Sprouts or Wegmans or whatever, the fresh market, whatever that retailer is, when you get those big wins, celebrate them, break out the champagne and cheese, because those celebrations are going to carry you you know, over the threshold when the losses set you back. And brands are a lot like troubled teens. Teens respond to the dysfunction of their parents and their family dynamics, and brands are similar. Brands and how they perform at the helm are the product of internal dysfunction in their leadership. That's why I say be coachable, be open to receiving feedback. It's incredibly important to your brand, and everybody has value. Remember that. Everybody has value. And if there's somebody you haven't talked to because they're the quiet person in the corner, or they're kind of sitting back listening, those are the people who might have the best insight for you. Pay attention to those people, because culture is, it's a function of leadership, and culture is a function of mindset. And the behavior of people are going to respond accordingly. So that's it for episode 1. I'm looking for people to be on the show to talk about different topics. If you think you have a topic that you want to help share and want to help deep dive into when it comes to mindset, please email me at michelle@cpgtherapy.com. I want to know what the obstacles are that are holding you back. I'll walk with you. I'll talk with you. We'll deep dive. We'll get into like the principles of this mindset. In the next episode, we're going to start deep diving into that. So definitely come back. I hope you come back. But let's talk. Send me your culture questions. Let's walk together and let's forge the path ahead. I'm Michelle Sheely, your queen of culture, and this is CPG Therapy.